During the week, you may have heard that the tech billionaire Elon Musk and his partner have welcomed into the world a son. And they've given him a very interesting name, an unusual name. It's caused a lot of discussion online about how this name should be pronounced. Apparently, it's pronounced X-A12. Over the years, I've found it fascinating to see how some celebrities choose to give their children unusual names. But you know, the Bible is full of names that sound unusual to our ears, at least. And one of those names is a man we've been looking at over the last few weeks. His name is Habakkuk. And his name means embrace or wrestle. And he wrote a short prophecy in the Old Testament, just 3 chapters. And we've been looking at that in a series called Trusting God in Troubled Times. Here's a quick summary of what we've learned so far. Habakkuk was deeply distressed by the trouble that he saw all around him. He lived in really troubled times. His country, the nation of Judah, God's people, were facing the potential of an invasion from a growing world superpower, the evil empire of Babylon. And so they were facing potential destruction. But they were also facing a possible disintegration from within, because they were being led themselves by an evil king who was leading his people into sin, into doing evil things. And so Habakkuk wrestles with some hard questions. In a sense, he wrestles with God. And chapters 1 and 2 of Habakkuk go a bit like this. It's a bit like a Q&A session, a back and forth between Habakkuk and God. Habakkuk begins by asking the question, why? Why, God, is this happening to us? Why is there so much evil in the world and in our nation? Why do you make me look at violence and destruction? Why do you not answer me? And then God does answer Habakkuk. And he says to Habakkuk, watch what I'm doing. Watch and be amazed at what I'm doing. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm actually raising up this nation of Babylon as a way of disciplining my people for their wrongdoing, as a way of getting their attention. Habakkuk is troubled by this answer. And so he comes back to God and he says essentially, what do you mean by this? What is going on, God? How can you possibly be involved in this situation? How can you do anything good through this? And then he decides he's going to wait again for God's answer, and God comes back to him a second time. And in this second answer, in chapter 2, we find there's a warning from God. And what God says essentially is, woe to all those who do evil. In particular, he's talking to Babylon, but it's a warning that rings through the ages to all who perpetrate evil. God says, woe to you people who do evil on the earth. But in the midst of this warning, in the midst of these woes, there's a window of hope through which we see God's great rescue plan for his people. And it's found in chapter 2, verse 4, where God says that the righteous will live by faith. The righteous will live by faith. In other words, even though God's people failed him, there is hope for them to be righteous again. And that message is a message for us as well. Even though we fail God, there is hope for us to be able to be righteous, to be right in God's eyes, to be right with God. How? Not through self-righteousness. You see that verse says there in Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 4, see, the enemy is puffed up, but the righteous person will live by faith. The righteous live by faith. So we don't become right with God through our own righteousness, through self-righteousness, which is kind of puffing ourselves up, but rather through faith, which, as we learned last week, is all about trusting God, trusting God to make us right, trusting God to save us and to fix us, trusting God completely with the whole of our life. So Habakkuk sees the big picture, that God is doing something in this world, in his world, that even though there's a great deal of trouble in the world, God is at work, that there is some purpose in the pain. And a part of that purpose is to purify his people, to preserve a remnant of people so that he can bring into the world the only one who can truly make people righteous, his son, Jesus Christ. And so once Habakkuk sees this bigger picture, his focus changes from the pain that he sees to a prayer in chapter 3. His focus changes from I guess an inward looking where he's sort of saying, woe is me, to worship. And we see that in chapter 3 in a prayer that he prays. And it begins like this. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Well, there's a message for us in this prayer as well. What is it? We're going to see in just a moment. But first, let's look at this clip called Fragile.